Kunle sat in the dimly lit living room, staring at the clock on the wall. His fingers drummed impatiently on the arm of the chair. Ada, his wife, had still not been back home from work, leaving him alone with their twin daughters, Zara and Zara. Kunle's mind raced with suspicion. For weeks, he had noticed Ada's odd behavior. Late nights, hushed phone calls, and a distant demeanor. His trust in her and his wife began to fade. The time is 11 o'clock and she is not yet back. What kind of job keeps someone late till this time? She's a married woman, for Christ's sake. She's cheating on me, he muttered under his breath. The thought consumed him until he decided to take action. A week earlier, he had plucked a few strands of Zara and Zara's hair and sent them off for a DNA test. He needed to know the truth. When the results arrived, Kunle's hands shook as he opened the envelope. The words on the report sent a wave of anger through him. Not a biological match. They're not mine, Kunle whispered, his voice trembling with fury. After everything I've done for her, for them. He clenched the paper in his fist, his mind spiraling into darkness. Ada had betrayed him, and he vowed to make her pay. But he wouldn't start with her. He would start with the twins. It was a quiet night when Kunle first entered the twins' room. Zara and Zara were fast asleep, their breaths even and peaceful. Kunle stood by the door for a moment, his face cold. Then he stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him. "Wake up," he whispered as he tapped both of them. Zara stirred first, blinking up at him in confusion. "Daddy? What's wrong?" "Shut up and listen," Kunle snapped, his voice low and threatening. "If either of you say a word about this, I'll kill you both. Do you hear me?" Zara and Zara exchanged terrified glances, their small bodies trembling. They didn't understand why their father was acting this way, but the menace in his tone silenced them. He pinned them one by one to the bed as he entered them. "Dad, please stop. It's painful." They cried with tears in their eyes. Kunle's visits became a nightmare. Repeated each night, Ada was away. Zara and Zara would lie awake, hoping he stops coming to abuse them. One evening, after Kunle had left their room, Zara sat up in bed, her face streaked with tears. She looked at her sister, who was curled up at the edge of the bed crying quietly. "We can't let this keep happening," Zara whispered. "What can we do?" Zara replied, her voice shaking. "He said he'd kill us." Zara's jaw tightened. "We'll record him. We need proof. Maybe Mom will believe us if we show her." She checked through her mother's drawer the next day and found an old phone. That night, when Kunle came into their room, Zara secretly pressed record, capturing the horrifying sounds of what they went through in the hands of their father. The twins endured days of torment before Zara finally decided enough was enough. One morning, after Kunle had gone to work, she turned to Zara. "We're telling Mama today," she said firmly. Zara hesitated, fear written all over her face. "What if he finds out? What if he hurts us?" "We can't stay silent anymore," Zara insisted. When Ada returned from her night shift, she found her daughters waiting for her in the living room. "Mama, we need to talk," Zara said, her voice trembling. Ada frowned, setting her bag down. "What is it, my babies? You look so serious." Zara burst into tears, and Zara held her hand tightly. "Mama, it's Daddy," Zara began. He's been coming into our room at night." Ada's heart sank as she listened to her daughters recount the horrors they had endured. Tears streamed down her face as Zara played the recordings. The muffled cries and Kunle's threatening voice were undeniable. No, this can't be," Ada whispered, covering her mouth in shock. That evening, Ada waited for Kunle to come home. The moment he walked through the door, she confronted him, her face red with anger. "Kunli, how could you?" she screamed, shoving the phone with the recordings into his face. Kunli glanced at the screen and then at Ada, his expression unreadable. "You want to know why I did it?" he said, his voice calm but icy. "Because they're not mine, Ada. They aren't mine, and you know it. How could you, Ada? How could you? You have been lying to me all this while. I have been raising another man's kids for the past 12 years, only for me to discover a few weeks ago. Your kids aren't mine. You used me, Ada," Kunli said angrily. Ada froze, her anger replaced by confusion. "What are you talking about?" Kunle pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his briefcase and threw it at her. "Read it. Those girls aren't mine. You cheated on me, and you freaking know it." Ada stared at the DNA results, her hands trembling. "Kunle, please let me explain. I did it for us. I was left with no other option." "For us? What do you mean? You opened your legs for another man, yet you said it's for us. I did everything just to make you happy, Ada. This is how you repay me," Kunli said angrily. "We were going through tough times years back. You lost your job, and I just graduated from school in search of a job. Your friend Alex offered to help. He said he would sleep with me before giving me a job at the bank. I had no other choice, so I did it. Till today, I've lived with the guilt of what I did. Please find a place in your hearts to forgive me. It will never happen again. I promise. Please." Ada pleaded, crying. "That's not an excuse for cheating on me. You are my wife, and I trusted you with everything. But you betrayed my trust. I'm done with you, and as for Alex, I'll pay that fool a visit tonight," Kunle said, as he dropped his bag and left home immediately. That night, Kunle drove out to visit his friend Alex, who betrayed him. He took a pistol with him. Kunle parked his car in front of Alex's luxurious house, his heart pounding like a war drum. The pistol in his pocket felt heavy, but not heavier than the betrayal he carried in his chest. He stepped out of the car, adjusted his shirt, and walked up to the door. Alex opened it, his face lighting up with a smile. "Kunle, my man. What's up? What brings you here at this time of the night?" Kunle forced a tight smile. "I just needed to talk to you, Alex. Man to man." "Of course. Come in," Alex said, stepping aside. Kunle entered the house, his eyes scanning the room. Everything about Alex's life screamed wealth. An expensive leather couch, a massive TV, and a shelf filled with rare liquors. Alex gestured toward the couch. "Have a seat. Let me grab us a drink," Alex said, heading to the bar. Kunle sat down, his hands gripping his knees. Moments later, Alex returned with 2 glasses of whiskey, handing one to Kunle. "So, what's on your mind?" Alex asked, taking a sip. Kunle stared at the amber liquid in his glass. "You and we've been best friends since secondary school, right?" Alex smiled, leaning back. "Of course. You're like a brother to me. We've been through thick and thin together." Kunle nodded slowly, setting his glass down on the table. "Exactly. That's why I trusted you. Why I never thought you'd betray me." Alex froze, his smile fading. "Betray you? Kunle? What are you talking about?" Kunle reached into his pocket and pulled out the pistol, placing it on the table. The metallic sound echoed through the room, making Alex flinch. "What the hell, Kunle?" Alex stammered, raising his hand slightly. "I'm going to ask you one question," Kunle said, his voice low and menacing. "And God help you if you lie to me." Alex's eyes darted to the gun and back to Kunle. "Man, is this some kind of joke? What are you talking about?" Kunle leaned forward, his hand resting on the gun. Did you sleep with my wife years ago before offering her a job at the bank? Yes or no? Alex's face turned pale. Kunle, listen. Yes or no? Kunle roared, slamming his hand on the table. Alex gulped, his voice barely a whisper. Yes, but it's not what you think. Before Alex could finish, Kunle pulled the trigger. Alex slumped back in his chair, blood pooling around him. Kunle sat there for a moment, breathing heavily as he placed the gun back on the table. After a few minutes, Kunle stood up, wiping his face with his hand. He walked to the door, pausing to look back at the mess he'd created. The morning after Kunle killed Alex, he sat in his living room, sipping coffee like nothing had happened. He tried to bury his guilt deep down, convincing himself that Alex deserved what he got. But his peace didn't last long. Around 10 a.m., a loud knock came at the door. Who's that? Kunle muttered, rising from his chair. He opened the door to find 2 police officers standing there, their faces stern. Good morning. Are you Mr. Kunle Adeyemi? One of the officers asked. Yes, Kunle replied. You're under arrest for the murder of Mr. Alex Bamidele, the officer said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. Kunle froze. What? Murder? I don't know what you're talking about. We have evidence linking you to the crime. Please come with us, the officer said firmly. Before Kunle could argue, the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. His neighbors peeked through their windows as he was led to the police car. At the station, Kunle sat in the interrogation room, his head in his hands. A detective entered, dropping a file on the table. Mr. Adeyemi, we know you were at Alex's house last night. Witnesses saw your car parked outside, and we found your fingerprints on the murder weapon. Do you have anything to say? Kunle's mind raced. He deserved it, he muttered under his breath. What did you say? The detective pressed. Kunle looked up, his eyes filled with anger. He slept with my wife. He betrayed me. I did what any man would do. The detective sighed. You're confessing to murder, Mr. Adeyemi. This will only make things worse for you. At home, Ada was pacing the living room. Zira and Zara sat on the couch, their faces pale. Mama, do you think the police will believe us? Zara asked, her voice trembling. They have to, Ada said, holding up the phone with the recordings. No one will hurt you ever again, not even your father. Hours later, 2 police officers arrived at the house. Ada handed over the phone and explained everything. Thank you for coming forward, Mrs. Adeyemi, one officer said. This evidence is enough to charge him with another crime. That evening, Kunle sat in his prison cell, his head bowed. A guard approached, unlocking the door. You have a visitor, the guard said. Kunle looked up in surprise as Ada stepped into the visitation room. What are you doing here? Kunle asked coldly. Ada stared at him, her eyes filled with fury. I wanted to see the face of the man who hurt my daughters. Kunle's expression darkened. They're not even my daughters, Ada. You betrayed me first. That doesn't justify what you did, Ada shouted. They're children, Kunle. Your hatred for me destroyed their lives. So what now? You're here to gloat? No, Ada said firmly. I'm here to tell you that I'm divorcing you. I've already started the process, and you'll never see Zira or Zara again. I don't care, you can keep them to yourself, Kunle said. About 2 months later, Kunle stood trial for the murder of his friend Alex and the repeated sexual assault of his twin daughters. In a packed courtroom, the judge declared him guilty of both crimes. For Alex's murder, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. And for the abuse of his daughters, he received an additional 300 years in prison. The sentences were to run consecutively, ensuring Kunle would spend the rest of his life behind bars. His wife, Ada, sat quietly unfazed in the courtroom, knowing justice had been served for her daughters. The end. Drop your thoughts on this story in the comments section. What would you have done if you found yourself in a similar situation?